had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire an energy vampire. But also, they're a literal vampire. And suddenly, my team is spending all their time sharpening wooden stakes and buying bulk silver and rehearsing ancient chants, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant takes insights from over 1 billion professionals to create a short list of the best fits for you. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
Every sip of Coca-Cola brings you closer to the excitement of the FIFA World Cup 26. Because nothing compares to the joy. So grab a Coke and drink in the FIFA World Cup 26. No purchase necessary. 13 plus in 50 U.S. states and D.C. with a web-enabled device. Ends March 1st with 8 entry periods. Rules at cokeurl.com/soccer rules.
Welcome back to I Want That Too, the podcast where Disney merch meets Disney history. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and I'm joined, as always, by the lovely Lauren Hersey. And how are you today, Lauren?
I am doing fantastic. It is a Sunday, and glad to be here talking about animals again on this episode. Like, who doesn't love our cuddly little animated friends?
Well, I speaking of animals, we have the 2 cats here at the house, and the problem is that when your cats really love you, they bring you things, and our particularly Ginger brings mice up out of the basement, and she. It's look what I brought for you, and it's like, and I got to tell you, I can't decide which is worse, the partial corpse or the actually still live thing that I now have to capture that scampers through the house. So I've kind of drawn on that, that just Mickey's relatives when they show up here at the house are usually in interesting shape.
Ooh, gross, Jim.
Yep.
All right, so we talked about Jim's cats. We talked about 101 Dalmatians, so we're puppies. And this week, we're talking all about Winnie the Pooh, who is turning 100 years old. So we're talking about what Disney's new branding and messaging already tells us. The first merch that just dropped, and the one item that collectors immediately locked onto, and why that one little detail might be our best hint yet as to what's coming for this big anniversary. Ooh. Then, on today's feature, Jim is breaking down why Winnie the Pooh has been handled very differently from almost every other Disney character in the past 65 years, and a story that starts with a British author telling bedtime stories to their son, winds through the war, licensing deals, department store closures, lawsuits, and somehow Pooh still ends up being one of Disney's most carefully managed and profitable characters. So cannot wait to hear that story. But before that, let's thank our sponsor.
And that is, of course, unlockmagic.com, which is the go-to place for some of the best deals on theme park tickets. And if Disney or Universal is anywhere on your travel radar for 2026, Unlock Magic can help you, lock in on great ticket prices without the stress. More to the point, this will be handled by people who really know the parks and know how to save you money. So if you're thinking, okay, maybe this is the year we finally go, head to unlockmagic.com to grab the best ticket prices and make that future trip just a little more magical. Okay, so top of today's show, you talked about, again, Pooh's 100th. This is, 1926 was when the first book was published, right? Literally entitled Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, and it's, it could be debated because there was a story for a newspaper written Christmas Eve, 1925. So we saw a lot of, the first rumblings of Winnie the Pooh's anniversary on Christmas Eve. And then, or you could say that Disney is celebrating this anniversary early because the first book really didn't come out until the fall of 1926. But nonetheless, a long runway for celebrating Pooh here. So this week, we got the official 100th anniversary branding from Disney, and it really ties back to that original kind of version of Winnie the Pooh. And, from the original version, a lot has changed, but the branding it's nice, and it kind of alludes to that this is more than just a single milestone. There's a lot more wrapped up to it than that. So it goes back to, like we were saying, A.A. Milne, who first wrote Winnie the Pooh in October 26th, like I said. And what's important to note with this, that Disney isn't just framing this as like one of their, movies or a studio anniversary. Like, the anniversary is going back to the literary beginnings, which obviously were not Disney 100 years ago. But like we said, that story came out in the newspaper Christmas Eve, 1925, 26. The book is considered the official starting point, which makes 26 the centennial year. So instead of just kind of circling that date on the calendar, it appears to be that we're being set up for a year-long celebration with a lot of overlapping Pooh anniversaries.
Yeah, and by the way, we were clued into this last year by Jim Cummings, the official voice of Winnie the Pooh, when I want to say, was it Fine Tuning we had him on? I forget where we did the interview with Jim. But he alluded to, next year, yes, 100th anniversary of Pooh. Oh my God, all of this stuff that's coming. So do you want to walk people through some of the milestones we're looking at?
Yeah, so the first thing in 2026, January 18th, and by the time this show drops, that will just be a few days before. But January 18th is Winnie the Pooh Day. And that is celebrated annually on A.A. Milne's birthday. And this year, it's the kickoff to the centennial celebration. Then we go into February 4th, which marks the 60th anniversary of Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, and that is the first of Disney's Pooh featurettes. And then we jump to summer, looking at July 15th, and that marks 15 years since Disney's 2011 Winnie the Pooh, which reintroduced the character to a whole new generation of kids. And then finally bringing this thing kind of to a close in October, and that anchors the actual 100th anniversary of the character's original publication. So lots of entry points for storytelling, for merch, and events throughout this year. So I think them dropping the branding is just the very first step.
Okay, but it's worth noting here, this just isn't a Disney-centric celebration, right?
Yeah, so publishers like HarperCollins, they've already released a special 100th anniversary editions of the original Pooh books. So they're complete with the classic illustrations, the commemorative designs, and I mean, that kind of signaling this centennial is being treated as, more than just Disney or entertainment, that it ties back to the literary success as well.
And but not just publishing, we also have institutions like museums stepping in.
Yeah, museums and cultural institutions are also getting involved. Like the National World War I Museum is hosting 100 years of Winnie the Pooh exhibition tied to Pooh Day in 2026, and then organizations in the UK are planning exhibitions and guided experiences connected to the locations that inspired the original stories, including the Ashtown Forest.
Yes, and wanted to mention the Ashdown Forest, that's supposedly the model for the 100-acre woods. And actually, Nancy, along with her friends Diane and Kathy, made a special trip there during a trip to the UK, I want to say 10 or 15 years ago, and spent the better part of the afternoon trying to find the Pooh Sticks Bridge. And, they told the story about how, you get to the Pooh Sticks Bridge and there isn't a single stick to be found in the woods anywhere around there because everybody wants to play Pooh Sticks at the Pooh Sticks Bridge. So they go out in the woods and they find branches who drop in the water. And it's like, it got to the point where bringing around sticks. All right, there were no sticks left in the 100-acre woods. Everybody has already thrown them off of the Pooh Sticks Bridge. But anyway, back to the anniversaries for 2026.
Yeah, and so the last couple episodes we've been talking about how many anniversaries Disney has stacked in 2026. So I think the next obvious question here becomes, all right, so how are they choosing to celebrate this? Because, the answer to that isn't just coming from like a movie announcement or something in the park. To me, it is coming from the merch.
Okay, and so talk to us. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a couple of waves of merch. It's a year-long celebration, but what are we seeing in the first wave?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty telling. So Disney released the 100th anniversary collection online. So it's kind of understated. It's not like a lot of their typical anniversaries with like the big, loud graphics or the year or like it's the 100th anniversary. So this is very like wearable, livable stuff. They have a nice quilt jacket. They have these cute Pooh and Friends overalls. And it's really subtle artwork pulled from the books and from 100-acre woods. So it's more, I would say, like lifestyle. But yeah, the real showstopper in this that, the internet is currently buzzing all about is the limited run release plush. And it is celebrating 6 years of Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree from 1966 and, 100 years from when the book was published. And so this little limited edition plush, it is made of knit fabric. It's a different fabric than traditional plush, which I guess maybe wouldn't be a plush, but you get the gist. It's a little stuffed animal. So it's cabled knit and it's in the original classic Pooh styling. And I would say looking at this little guy that I would say people were buying him more as a keepsake than to be played with. And it is, they're limiting the production of this item to just 7,500 pieces. And I think that's maybe why fans clocked it that, this is kind of going to be the direction that Disney is taking as far as the anniversary celebration merch goes. Do you see him on this picture I sent you?
I do.
He kind of reminds me of your Mickey gnome. Like that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a minimalist design to this, but on the other hand, it's very faithful to both the Pooh from the Ernest Shepard illustrations from the A.A. Milne book, but at the same time, right on the money for, the way we know Pooh from the Disney film. So it's an interesting Venn diagram they've worked here.
Yeah, I think he's really cute. And it's 12 inches and it's $34.99. And as of today, they still had some in stock on the Disney store. So check that out. And but the bigger question around, this anniversary and the merch is, why does Winnie the Pooh still work after 100 years? Like when so many characters, they don't land and they don't connect. Why do you think, Jim, that Pooh still works?
I think Pooh still works because he's so deceptively simple.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something about, the gentleness of the character, or more to the point, they're not big stories. They're the closest thing that I think that Winnie the Pooh has to a villain, the heffalumps. I mean, which to Pooh's way of thinking, oh yeah, those are villains. They steal honey, and even when something is thought to be villainous, like Tigger initially, and Piglet thinks of Tigger as a villain because he bounces on him. It's all very sweet and very gentle, don't you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of comfort in that character. And like, if you look at where we're at in the world, like who could resist, something that is more gentle and comfortable? So I think I'm with you. That's why Pooh continues to be, such an iconic and, I mean, like you mentioned, profitable character for Disney. So we're going to keep our eyes and ears open for all the things coming. I think that this is just the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing right now.
Okay, this is true. And the irony here, folks, is, of course, we all, learn to love Pooh in our childhood. That's when we're initially introduced to this character. Whereas if we go back to the origins of Winnie the Pooh, and again, Lauren alluded to, those starting back in 1925 with that story in the London Times, this story gets complicated and adult really fast. But we'll get to that in a moment. But first, this.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to I Want That Too. I have something really exciting to share. Eric and I just launched a brand new podcast right here on the Jim Hill Media Network. And yes, that Eric from the Epic Universe podcast. It's called Diz and Hers, and it's all about the Disney community, the conversations, the opinions, and what everybody's talking about online. And this week, we're breaking down a couple of moments where Disney's fans had a lot to say, from Galaxy's Edge bringing back the original trilogy characters to the internet proving once again that it cannot be trusted with acronyms. If you're a Disney fan who loves scrolling Reddit, reading the comment sections, and keeping up with the fan discourse, this podcast might just be for you. So what are you waiting for? Go search Diz and Hers wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe now.
This episode is brought to you by Stouffer's. Here comes three-time juggling champion Natalia Rogers. She's juggling law school, her TA job. Oh, narrowly catches the laundry. What's that fourth ball? Parents unexpectedly showed up at dinner time? Is that too much for Natalia? Not with Stouffer's Chicken Alfredo and its mouth-watering mix of Asiago, Romano, and Parmesan. When you're juggling four things at once and the clock strikes dinner, think Stouffer's.
And we're back, folks. And, as Lauren mentioned, we are celebrating a couple of anniversaries this year in regard to Winnie the Pooh. There is, of course, the publication of the original Pooh book in 1926. There's also the first Pooh featurette that arrived in theaters February of 1966. Next month will be the 60th anniversary. And Lauren, in her wonderful news section of the show, mentioned, for example, how the World War I Museum will be celebrating 100 years of Winnie. And, well, that's largely because A.A. Milne, the author of the Pooh books, well, he was a lieutenant in the Royal Warwick Regiment, in the UK back in the day. Also, worth noting that, this gentleman who was born back in January of 1882 was a noted English author and playwright before Pooh came along. And that's the Pooh origin story is kind of interesting, Lauren. Pooh is something that AA did for his son, Christopher Robin, who, by the way, was born in 1920. So you got to understand that when all this is happening, Christopher Robin is a 5 or 6 year old boy. All right. And this is a bedtime story that his dad had initially told just for him, that involved Christopher's own teddy bear. Which, by the way, interesting bend on the story. The original Winnie the Pooh, the actual plush that all of these stories were built around, are actually on display in a branch of the New York Public Library. In fact, Nancy and I made a special trip there during one of our times down to the city, and you look into the glass case, and they are very loved. Pieces of plush. This is something that a little boy, kind of hugged and played with to death. They're kind of beaten up. But if we want to talk about the actual inspirations for Winnie the Pooh, there was, first of all, there was the bear in the London Zoo. He was called Winnipeg. He had actually been donated to the zoo. He'd come over from Canada, from Manitoba to be exact. But Christopher, would call when A. Milne and his wife would take Christopher to the zoo, he'd call Winnipeg Winnie. And then when they were walking through, the London Public Gardens, there was a swan that Christopher particularly loved, and he had named that thing Pooh. And so Milne, when he was telling the bedtime stories for his son involving his teddy bear, sort of melded these two names together, and that's where we actually got Winnie the Pooh. But anyway, as the story goes, Lauren, one day a friend is there at the house as Milne is putting, his son to bed at night and telling a Winnie the Pooh story. And the friend's kind of hanging in the doorway listening to Milne tell the story. And they put Christopher to bed, and they're walking back down to the drawing room to have an adult beverage. And the friend says, that's something. I don't know what it is, but that's something. You should do something with that. And Milne's like, no, that's for my kid. I'm an adult. I write plays, I write stories. And he's like, no, you should do something. So he writes the one story that you talked about back in the news thing. In fact, it's the story that actually Disney's featurette is based on, Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Trees. Because the title of the story that runs in the London Times for Christmas Eve, 1925, is The Wrong Sort of Bees. And in fact, if you remember that featurette, Winnie the Pooh, as he's clutching the balloon, shouts down to Christopher Robin, "These are the wrong sort of bees. They aren't interested in making honey. They want to sting me." But anyway, that story runs in the London Times. People find it charming and say, "Oh, you should collect more of these." And so that's what Milne does. There's and the first book, Winnie the Pooh, as you mentioned, came out October 1926, and becomes this enormous bestseller. In fact, by the time the phenomena reaches its white hot moment, Lauren, 50 million books have been sold in 33 different languages. All right, so this is a worldwide phenomenon that Milne, at least initially, is like, ooh, I need to capitalize on this. So he writes a second book, The House at Pooh Corner. That comes out in 1928. It's only then, when the phenomenon reaches its truly crazy, point, that Milne suddenly takes a step back and it's like, oh dear, what have I done? Because the mistake that Milne felt he made later on, that he admitted to, is like, I called the kid in the book Christopher Robin, and that's my actual son's name. And suddenly, this is a 5 and 6 year old boy, Lauren, who doesn't have a private life anymore because he's Christopher Robin from the Winnie the Pooh books. And so Milne actually, at this point, it's hits full reverse. It's like, whoa. I may have done a bad thing here. And it's worth noting, even with that level of success, Milne never wrote another Winnie the Pooh story. Just that there were the 2 books in 26 and 28 and never wrote another story. In fact, what's interesting is when he writes his autobiography, Lauren, this is a 400-page book, and out of that book, only 4 pages are designated to discussing Winnie the Pooh. That Milne had a very complicated feelings about Winnie the Pooh after that point. In fact, he was looking to distance himself from the character starting in the 30s. But at the same time, he recognized that, well, I still want, I'm still a provider for my family. I still need to make money. And so at this point, Lauren, this is when Stephen Slesinger enters the picture. And Stephen Slesinger is an American. He's a literary agent who has actually founded one of the world's very first character licensing firms over in the United States. In fact, he's already acquired the rights to make merch that's based on Tarzan and Charlie Chan. And he's deliberately made a trip over to the UK because he's now set his sights on getting the licensing rights to Winnie the Pooh. And he meets with A.A. Milne and offers him $1,000 advance on the merchandising rights. And the deal that they cut is that from this point forward, A.A. Milne will get 3% of every single Winnie the Pooh product sold around the planet. And he doesn't have to do anything, he just has to sit there and let the checks come in. On the other hand, Slesinger, in addition to the merchandising rights, has also acquired the radio rights, the television rights, and ultimately the film rights. But this also allows the Slesinger family to make a very healthy living off of Winnie the Pooh. Now, we have to get to the Disney part of this story. And, Walt, in much the same way that, Mary Poppins came on his radar because, Diane and, her sister, Walt's daughters, loved reading the P.L. Travers books. And in the same way, the Disney daughters grew up loving the Winnie the Pooh books. So, Walt turns to his brother Roy and says, hey, can you go investigate the Winnie the Pooh situation? Maybe we could make a movie based on that. And this is 1947. Roy, goes over to the UK, looks into it, and comes back and says, no, it's a mess. Milne sold a lot of the rights to the Slesinger family, and we have to pay them top dollar to get it. But at the same time, he's given rights to things like his men's club. We'd have to negotiate with them as well before we could ever make a movie. So that idea gets tabled for a while, Lauren. It's not until 1953 that Stephen Slesinger dies, and leaving behind his widow Shirley as well as a 1-year-old daughter Patty, and Milne himself dies in 56. And again, remember, there's only been the 2 books, the first in 26, the next in 28. And Pooh is popular, but has begun to fade at this point. And now Shirley, Stephen's widow, she steps up and starts managing her late husband's company. And but she's also looking to set up a stable, steady income for herself and her daughter. And the problem here is that again, Pooh's fading. So it's like, all right, I have to move Winnie the Pooh to the next level. Because if he's a more popular character, that means more merch sales for me, and that's more money for myself and my daughter. So we jump ahead to 1961, and Shirley is now working with puppeteer Bill Baird to develop a Winnie the Pooh series for television. In fact, folks, if you want to see what this might have been like, you Google the Shirley Temple Storybook. This was a TV series that ran for 2 seasons on NBC. The episode you're looking for actually aired in October of 1960, and it was supposed to be a backdoor pilot for a Winnie the Pooh television series that would be done entirely with puppets. And it's really charming. I mean, it looks like, they basically translated the Ernest Shepard drawings straight into this puppet show. But it's at this moment that Walt Disney reaches out and, he lets, Mrs. Slesinger know. It's like, well, look, I know you're getting this TV thing going, but I'm interested in making a Winnie the Pooh movie. And Shirley, here's what Walt's saying and thinking, well, if a Walt Disney gets in the Winnie the Pooh business, I mean, he's, the king of family entertainment. That's going to mean so much more from a merchandise point of view. So she signs a deal with Walt, but with the understanding, like, look, I'm mostly in this for the merchandise sales. I need you to guarantee that we're going to have really, really strong merchandise sales. And Walt says, I have an idea. And we'll get to what that idea is in a moment. But first, this. And we're back. Okay, so again, folks, just to recap, we have Shirley Slesinger, who, again, after her husband died in 1953, to create a steady income for her family, is looking seriously to up interest in people buying Winnie the Pooh-based products because she gets a slice of the merchandise sales, and Walt Disney has come a-knocking. With the notion of I want to make a Winnie the Pooh movie. But again, Shirley's like, I'd love to make a deal with you. But again, I've got to be guaranteed strong merchandise sales. And Walt's like, I have an idea. So picture this, Lauren. It's 1964. And it is... it's a full 2 years before the Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree featurette arrives in theaters in February of 1966. But Walt cuts a deal with Sears Roebuck and awards them a 30-year-long exclusive licensing deal for Winnie the Pooh. So Sears can make clothes and toys and plush based on these A.A. Milne characters. And what's fascinating, Lauren, is you can go today to the Sears catalog that came out in 1965 and 1966, again, before the film. And you can see the Winnie the Pooh merchandise, the clothes that Sears put out ahead of the movie. They immediately got on board with this idea. It's like, oh, yes, us having an exclusive on Winnie the Pooh, this beloved character from the 1920s that now Walt Disney's about to do, a series of featurettes on. Let's get in on the ground floor. And of course, the Schlesingers, Shirley and Patty, are thrilled because this deal, it almost immediately makes them millionaires. And this deal stays in place for the next 2 decades. Okay. However, in 1984, Michael Eisner becomes the new chairman of the Walt Disney Company. And, as he comes through the door, Michael goes over the books at Disney. And he sees that, well, who makes a lot of money for us? It's like, well, Winnie the Pooh makes a lot of money for us. But on the other hand, there's this deal that got set up back in the mid-1960s, and, Eisner's looking at it, and it's like, that is really favored heavily towards Sears. Disney gets a very nice cut of Winnie the Pooh sales. But Sears, and not only that, Sears is kind of calling the shots as to what Disney does with the characters. Like, for example, by the way, Lauren, I'm just going to throw this out there. You can Google this at your leisure, but Pooh for president? If you Google that in 1968, 1972, and 1976, the Walt Disney Productions, on the heels of those years' actual, really for real presidential campaigns in the United States, staged Winnie the Pooh for President events that were held not only in the Disney parks, but Sears did things at their stores around the country. In fact, there is honestly one of the weirdest pieces of video you will see in your life. It's something that's actually produced by a Sears outlet in Florida. It's a half-hour-long piece of television where it's supposedly the convention for Winnie the Pooh, and he's competing against Rotten the Wolf, or Rotten Van Wolf, for the nomination. And again, if you got a half hour to kill, folks, it's a very strange piece of video. But anyway, Michael Eisner is, and again, he's come through the door at Disney, and, the Bass brothers, who have just bought a very big position in the Disney company, are flat out told Michael, you need to make more money. You need to make a lot more money. And so Michael's looking at this Sears deal and figures we gotta renegotiate that. But he does this in an interesting way. He turns to Sears and says, okay, I understand, you have a 30-year deal, and it doesn't run out till 1994. However, we are considering here at the Disney company producing a brand new show for Saturday morning called The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. And this will be, a Saturday morning show. There will be, we're hoping it runs for a couple of seasons, so there might be as many as 50 or 60 episodes when it ends. And I'm thinking that there would be so much more interest in Winnie the Pooh merchandise if there were a brand new show for Saturday morning. But if we're going to do that, I think we need a new deal with you folks. And Sears, for lack of a better term, fell for the bait. It's like, yes, we will come back to the table, and we will renegotiate this deal. And so the show, now mind you, to give Sears credit, they waited till The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh debuted on ABC in January of '87. It was almost immediately a hit, and they're like, okay, all right, we get it. We'll come back to the table. November of 1987, Disney and Sears announced a brand new 10-year-long deal. And I have to say, the Slesinger family, not entirely happy with what's going on. In fact, what's interesting in this same window of time is Disney renegotiates a deal with the Slesinger family. They cut their royalty. What they're getting from 4% of all Pooh sales to 2% of all Pooh sales. But the argument is like, no, we have this brand new deal with Sears. We have this brand new animated series. Winnie the Pooh sales, merchandise sales will go through the roof. You'll make the same, if not more money. Just, we need a better deal. And so they sign. But this is where it gets interesting, Lauren. Shirley goes to Walt Disney World. And kind of like you, she wanders around the shops of Walt Disney World. And in fact, in her case, she's looking for Winnie the Pooh merchandise. And she goes on a shopping spree. And she comes home with 2 suitcases full of Winnie the Pooh merchandise, which she then pulls all of her contracts out and starts looking for, all right, well, how much do we make off of the sale of this? And it's like she starts to find items that aren't listed, that, things that aren't officially licensed. And it's like, well, what's going on here? And also during this same time, Lauren, Walt Disney Home Entertainment has begun selling VHS cassettes of, the Pooh featurettes, the Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree from 66, and then Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day from 68, and then Winnie the Pooh and Tiggertoo from 74. Never mind the collections of episodes of the New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh that have been out on home video. And she's like, wait a minute, I don't see any video revenue. Where's that? And so she reaches out to Disney, and Disney says, well, read your contract. You know, there's nothing in there that says anything about you getting a cut of the videos. You get it from the merchandise sales, from the plush, from the clothes. This isn't our fault. That's, your husband when he made out that contract years and years ago. But on the other hand, here's Shirley, who's watching Peggy Lee sue the Disney company over the work she did on Lady and the Tramp. And in October of 1992, Peggy actually gets a $3 million settlement. Well, she's awarded $3 million. The settlement is then negotiated down much, much further than that. But Shirley's like, well, okay, people are going after Disney in regard to video. And more to the point, I'm looking at all these things that are licensed that I'm not seeing, show up on my paperwork. So she and her daughter Patty sued Disney in 1991. And meanwhile, here's Disney dealing with Sears, and they're a couple of years into the deal, and Disney and Sears Roebuck are now butting heads because Disney feels like this retail chain is just being far too conservative when it comes to the merchandising of this A.A. Milne character. And on the other hand, Sears is not happy with Disney right now because remember back in March of 1987, Lauren, we saw the launch of the Disney Store chain. And in fact, by this point in the history of the chain, there are 250 stores in malls all over North America, which Sears now sees as direct competition for their stores. So Disney and Sears continue to butt heads. 1994, they end their 10-year-long deal early, 3 years early. And this is when, Lauren, Disney Consumer Products is finally, for the first time, totally in control of Winnie the Pooh and how it's merchandised. And so they break it into three distinctly different product lines. There's Disney Pooh, which, by the way, to circle back to the limited edition 7,500 a number of the Pooh dolls that the Disney stores make available for sale. What makes the Disney Pooh different from all of the other Poohs, it has the red shirt. That's how you know it's the Disney Pooh. Whereas they split the line also into Classic Pooh, where they created merchandise that was based on the Ernest Shepard illustrations from the A.A. Milne book. And then this is the one I think you'll find fascinating, Lauren. They created the 100 Acre Collection, which was a product line that was strictly aimed at adult females that was then sold in upscale department stores like Neiman Marcus. So it's like going after the high-end Pooh fans. And if we jump ahead just a year or so after this, here's Michael Eisner speaking in front of investors and talking about, boy, we did the right thing. We went from Winnie the Pooh being $100 million, business line for the Disney company to now it's a $1 billion business line, Pooh's second only to Mickey in regard to the money that he makes. And but here's the kicker, Lauren, that Shirley and Patty noticed something interesting. That here's Michael Eisner bragging about that, go from $100 million to $1 billion, and yet they're looking at the checks that are coming in from Disney, and they aren't that much bigger than what they used to get when Sears was the one handling all this stuff, and things get kind of grisly going forward, which again is appropriate because we're talking about a bear here. And by the way, if you want to learn more story or details about this story, I want to direct your attention to this month's Disney Unpacked, where as we tell the story of Pooh's Honey Hunt at Tokyo Disneyland and, how that ride, also ties in with the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh at Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom of Florida, we'll also talk about the Slesingers' battle with Disney, which continued for more than 11 years.
What an interesting story there. But for today, I think it's time that we close up shop.
Okay, no, I can get behind that. Oh, and by the way, folks, if you want to keep up with everything happening here at the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, please follow us on social. And don't forget to check out our Patreon for bonus shows and early access.
Yeah, like Disney Unpacked. And if you have a question or an idea for a future episode, we love to hear from you. Shoot us a message, jim@jimhillmedia.com, or I'm at lauren@laurenhersey.com.
Oh, and if you like the show, leave us a quick rating or a review. It helps other Disney fans find I Want That Too.
All right, that does it for today's episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on I Want That Too.